Well, hello, everyone. It's nice to be with you today or later on if you're watching this on the video. So my name is Errol O'Neill, and I'll be talking today about fostering language acquisition through the guided use of AI and online translation. And you have a QR code that's there that I'll also have at the end of the presentation, where if you're interested in this PowerPoint or some of the resources I'll mention, you can get them from there. Okay, so today I'll be talking about online translators and L2 instruction, also AI and L2 instruction, comparing the two, talking a little bit about some tasks and policies that can be done with these tools, examples of training for students in how to use online translators or AI effectively. And then we should have some time for discussion or any questions you have. And just to quickly say who I am, so this is sort of like an existential question, who am I? I am an associate professor at the University of Memphis. I designed the basic language program for French for U of M Global, our online program. I've been doing research for online writing tools and L2 learning. I have teaching experience. I've given a number of presentations and workshops. And I also am the author of the book chapter, The Fine Line Between Digital Literacy and Academic Dishonesty, which just came out this past summer. So that gives you a little idea who I am, what my experience is, and where I'm coming from in terms of this topic. To get started, I'd like to talk about some definitions. With online translators, people pretty much all know what online translators are by now, but they convert inputs, and it's not just text, it's also audio or visual input as well, from one language to another. There are often additional features to assist the user in fine-tuning their output, but the main feature is the translation. So there are a number of ones, including Google Translate is probably the best known. And many people don't know that online translators are actually a form of generative AI. So if you've been using an online translator, you've actually been using generative AI for quite a while now. And most instructors and students are familiar with online translators. So I'm going to mention them and briefly talk about some of their features, but focusing to a large extent on AI as well. Speaking of AI then, for AI chatbots, for the way they work is with a given plain text language prompt, it generates responses in a conversation style format, and it's predicting what it, I hesitate to use the word thinks because it doesn't think obviously as a human does, but it tries to predict what the best output is going to be for the prompt that the user enters. It can do almost an unlimited number of tasks, including translating text, generating new text in the language, and we'll go over some uses in a little while. And you have some of the big names that are there. ChatGPT has sort of become synonymous with AI chatbot, but there are a number of other ones out there as well. And there are an increasing number of domain-specific chatbots, including for second language learning and for instruction. But I'm going to focus mostly on the more general purpose chatbots, since those are very widely known and available. Talking a little bit about online translators and second language instruction. With online translators, they go back to 1997 with Babelfish. If any of you have been teaching or learning languages for a while, that you probably have heard of Babelfish before. So it was launched in 1997, and then already in the literature in 1998, there were reports of students using it. So students are very quick to pick up on new technologies that are available. And online translators have evolved from being rule-based, being programmed into what the translation should be for given input. So to now it's neural machine translation, where it has corpora of billions of tokens, and it uses that to predict what the correct translation will be. And the output is generally one translation, but nowadays you can a number of other choices as well. If you click on the translation, for example, there are other tools that are available that I'll show some more of in a minute. Some concerns have evolved. So at the beginning, the concern was online translators would make student writing incomprehensible, but now the concern is usually, are online translators too good? Are students doing any work at all or any learning at all? And then discussions of how can we detect or prevent online translator usage. More and more people in the field are talking about how to foster learning through online translators. So how to use it to our advantage to help students with their learning. And just very quickly, this is Google Translate. So you can put in on the left side, you put in a word or a phrase or sentence. And then on the right-hand side, it gives you the translation. If you click, you can often get several other options. It can also translate idioms. It used to be that online translators were not good at translating idioms, but now they do fairly well with a number of idioms. And if you're familiar with French, you see here on the right-hand side, there's a literal translation of "it's a piece of cake." But if you click and look under it, "c'est du gâteau," that's a more colloquial translation of the expression. So it does sometimes give you options to work with instead of just having one output that comes out. You can also speak. You can speak to the both on the app and on the web, and it will transcribe it and translate it. And you can also have a conversation. So one person can speak in, let's say, English, and then the other person speaks in French, and it will translate it live. And I'll just show a quick clip of that. And I believe the audio should work.
Excuse me, sir. I've lost my dog. Have you seen a dog?
Excusez-moi, monsieur. J'ai perdu mon chien. Avez-vous vu un chien?
Je suis désolé, je n'ai pas vu de chien.
I'm sorry, I didn't see a dog.
So if you're imagining two different people speaking, one speaking in one language, the other speaking in the other language, it's transcribing and translating it and pronouncing it in nearly real time. So that can be useful for conversation, for practice as well. Some student uses of online translators, and they're widely used. So a study I did found that 87.7% of face-to-face students use online translators on graded homework, even though at the time they were prohibited. So a very large majority of students. The same was found in terms of during classes in another study, that up to 83% of students were using it, even if they weren't necessarily allowed to. There are some positive aspects for using online translators. A study that I did found that students had higher composition scores when they were able to use an online translator. Another study found lexical and syntactic complexity increased, as did accuracy. A more recent study found that students had improved vocabulary retention after using the online translator. So there can be something in terms of their language acquisition that's helpful if they're using an online translator. Looking now at AI chatbots. They're based on large language models. Well, you've probably heard of LLMs. So they're neural networks that are based on billions of data points. And the idea is that it produces output that is predicted to be the most appropriate answer. Some concerns are who's doing the work. Chatbots can create entire compositions in the target language within seconds. One solution to that is having multi-step tasks. So students are using the AI for part of the assignment, but not on another part of it, for example, doing some training to students in terms of responsible use. And I'll give some examples of that later. So there are a number of approaches. Some positive aspects of AI chatbots, although the new generation of AI chatbots have only been around for a few years, they actually have been, there have been chatbots going back to the 1960s. But in terms of generative AI, the more recent ones, they've been found to provide timeliness of language support and practice. It's basically there at any time a student would need help or would like to practice. AI can adjust to students' needs based on fluency and content. So in many, but not necessarily all cases, the AI chatbot will try to adapt its output based on what they think, what it thinks, or what it perceives to be the student's level in the language. It's also been found that student performance improves in terms of grammar and lexical diversity when using AI chatbots. It can also be used for creating outlines. If students have ideas, it can help them create an outline for essays, for example. Other studies have found that there's increase in sustained performance in L2 speaking during and after AI use. It's allowing students to speak more, they sort of get to practice with an AI, and then that helps them in terms of motivation. It helps decrease rather their anxiety. They're practicing it out on a machine first, and then when it comes to speaking to a human, they're a little less nervous about it once that comes around. And there have been a few meta-analyses done of recent articles, and one of them found that on a wide variety of written and spoken tasks, students using chatbots tend to perform better than students that were not using the chatbots. There is a need for guidance on AI use. It's becoming very prevalent, as I'm sure all of you are noticing, for better or worse. So one study, just looking in the past 3 years, so in 2023, one study found that 58% of ESL learners use ChatGPT weekly, about 15% used it daily. The following year, there was a survey in 16 countries that found that 86% of college students reported using AI. And then earlier this year, the Chronicle of Education found that it was in the US, 92% of undergraduates are using AI to some extent, which is increasing from the study they had done the previous year. And perhaps concerningly, about half of students said that their instructor did not provide an explicit AI policy. So students may not know what their instructor is or is not allowing in terms of AI usage. So that's an important consideration. Another consideration is that there's no foolproof way to determine whether AI was used. We can definitely, especially with languages, if it's a first semester student and they're coming up with advanced grammatical structures, that could be a pretty good indication. But once students advance more, it becomes more difficult to tell. And with compositions in English, so there were some college students and faculty who were asked to identify between 4 compositions which one was produced by AI, and they had about a 30% success rate, which means it's about the same as chance. So they had if they were just picking blindly, they'd have a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. So it's just slightly better than randomly guessing. So they were not able to necessarily tell when AI was used. Another study found that of the AI detectors that are out there that were tested, none of them was accurate all the time in identifying whether an AI was used. And on some texts, they were actually unable to detect AI at all, or vice versa. They said that AI was used when it had been entirely human written. And OpenAI themselves, the people behind ChatGPT, pulled their detector because of what they called a low rate of accuracy. So there can be hints and there could be ways of trying to determine probabilities of whether or not AI is used, but it's very hard to definitively say whether or not AI was used on a given text. To compare quickly, between online translators and chatbots. So I picked the 2 most popular ones to compare. Google Translate supports more languages than ChatGPT does. So the number's around 58. They don't officially say, but it's been tested out in 58. There may be other languages where it has some capabilities. With Google Translate, content can be written by the student in their native language and then translated into the L2 by Google Translate. With ChatGPT, the chatbot can also just create an entirely new text in the target language for them. Students for a translator can click on individual words to get options or alternate translations. With ChatGPT, that's not possible, but you can ask follow-up questions to get more information about the translation. With the online translator, there's often synonyms, brief definitions. That's not the case with ChatGPT, but as I just said, you can ask follow-up questions. And sometimes Google Translate can be detected by language teachers, but not to a statistically significant level, and the same is true for ChatGPT as well. Comparing some other aspects in terms of translation, so that's just one of many features of AI, but looking at comparing them with online translators. One study found there was no statistical difference between the quality of online translator output and the output if you ask an AI chatbot to do the same translation. Another study found that ChatGPT actually did better than Google Translate in terms of doing a translation from one language to another. Another article looked at idioms specifically, and in many cases, ChatGPT and Google Translate had almost identical results. So here's an example in Spanish that was cited in the article. So Juan kicked the bucket, Juan pateó el balde. My understanding is that's a literal translation, word for word, of kick the bucket, as if someone was literally kicking a pail. So that is not an accurate translation in terms of the idiom. The author said that in some languages, online translators had an edge in their limited testing, but in other cases, they were equivalent. And as I mentioned, it's possible to ask ChatGPT follow-up questions if you're not sure about a given translation. So with Google Translate, and I know some of this may be small, you don't need to read all of it. The idea is that you have the translation that's there, and then beneath it, you have some definitions, you have some synonyms. So it actually, compared to the old days when a student would put something in the translator and they got one thing out, with here, students can have a lot of tools to help them determine whether the translation is appropriate or what else they might want to say. With ChatGPT, it can give some descriptions, and I like to use the word set, S-E-T, in English, because it has over 100 dictionary definitions in the Oxford Dictionary. So it'd be nearly impossible for it to be right in every circumstance. But it does mention here that it can be translated as ensemble in French, but it does not give more detail, whereas in this case, Google Translate provides more to go from for students. Another example with colloquial language, with Google Translate, if you talk about ghosting someone, it doesn't know what to do with that. So it translates ghosted as literally Fatima ghosts, the word for ghosts, and then tries to put it in past tense. Whereas with ChatGPT, it explains what it means and then gives some examples of how you could say the same thing in French. And it turns out some people in France are starting to just use the word ghoster. They're just directly taking the word from English. But these options that are given here are perfectly understandable in French. So in this case, ChatGPT did better than Google Translate. A few highlighted features of AI. AI can provide grammar explanations for students, explain vocabulary words, help students with brainstorming ideas or organizing their thoughts. It can also provide some suggestions based on assignment prompts, so not necessarily writing the entire thing for them, but giving them ideas of how to get started. So avoiding the blank page syndrome where you just don't know where to get started. A chatbot could help with that. It can also serve as a chat buddy. Student can access it anytime and to help them with reviewing. With most chatbots now, it has a feature where it will read the outputs so students can hear how it's pronounced. It can generate review questions for students. It could give students study tips. So a wide variety of uses, not just translating, but also using it as a study tool and as a conversation partner. And here's an example of ChatGPT doing a conversation. So I'm pretending in this that I'm an ESL learner, And so this is a conversation that I had. So I'll play part of this as an example.
I am an English student and I want help speaking. Can you help me practice?
Of course, I'd be happy to help you practice your English speaking skills. What specific topics or areas of English would you like to work on?
Can we talk about food?
Absolutely. Let's talk about food. Is there a particular aspect of food you'd like to discuss, like your favorite cuisine, cooking tips, or any specific food-related vocabulary you want to practice?
I love to eat pizza.
Pizza is delicious. What do you like most about pizza? Is there a favorite topping or type of pizza you prefer?
I like meat on my pizza, but I don't remember the name of the type of meat I like.
No worries. There are several types of meat that people commonly enjoy on pizza. Some options include pepperoni, sausage, bacon, or even ham. Does any of these sound like the meat you like on your pizza, or is it something else?
Yes, pepperoni, that's it. It's round and red, right?
Yes, that's right. Pepperoni is a popular pizza topping.
So that gives you an idea. So it's speaking in a pretty fluent way to the learner, and it's reacting to what I say. So I pretended not to know the word for pepperoni. It gave several examples, and then it interacted with me basically. So it could be useful in terms of practicing conversation and learning. Some features of AI for teachers. So we also, as instructors, can use AI to assist us in our lesson planning, for example, for brainstorming for ideas, suggesting learning objectives for a specific theme, for example. It's also possible to ask for detailed time lesson plans. In some cases, I've tried that and it seems to come out with something fairly useful. In other cases, it's something that would need to be tweaked, but it can be a starting point if someone was interested in doing it. It can also design units. If you talk about ACTFL standards, for example, it can tell you these are some activities based on such and such standard for ACTFL. So it actually can be pretty helpful in terms of brainstorming or getting some ideas of activities and lessons. It can help with producing rubrics, which is something that a lot of people dislike doing. So given instructions for an assignment, it can suggest rubrics. It could be edited. It can generate text to demonstrate different grammatical forms. You can also talk to it as if you were talking to a colleague and mention, this is what I'd like to do. It can give some ideas and have a back and forth related to it. It can help with creating activities, project-based learning, quizzes, comprehension questions, and basically it can be something to start from. So I'd like to say that it's not going to do our work for us, obviously, we're the experts still, but it can be a starting point where we can develop more after that, after we have the initial idea. In terms of online translators and AI, looking at how we incorporated with students, and it's good to consider options. And many of the strategies that people use for online translators can also be used with AI chatbots. And some strategies are that have been identified in the literature include survey and reflection. So exploring online translation with students. So instead of just saying you're not allowed to use it, exploring what are some of the advantages or disadvantages and answer questions that they have. There's also another process, which is adapt, and that's providing students with assignments and rubrics that encourage them to not use an online translator, but take that into account in case they are using it. So one example of that would be saying that a student needs to include a certain grammatical form or certain vocabulary words. If they're using a translator or a chatbot, it may not necessarily fulfill all the requirements of an assignment, for example. Some other considerations are with AI, you have the ability to write prompts. So the instructions that you give to the AI, and you can provide students with pre-written prompts so they can find out what the output is from the chatbot. And it's important to note that you never, or it's incredibly unlikely that you're going to get the same answer twice. So you may have students that are asking the same chatbot the same question, and they're going to get 20 different responses or 25 different responses. So students can explore to see, well, what sort of outputs they're getting, and you can compare with students in class, for example. You can show them examples of good prompts, and there's the concept of prompt engineering, helping students to create prompts that will get them the output that they're looking for. You can refresh responses. If you don't like what comes out of the chatbot initially, you can refresh it and it will generate a new answer. Providing the chatbot in particular, providing context to the chatbot in particular can be helpful. So for example, the student saying that they're studying first semester Spanish at college, that can help with making sure that the output is level appropriate. Or if we're using it as instructors, imagine you're a teacher of French at the high school level or at the college level. And so that way, when it's generating its response, it's geared towards that situation. There are some ideas of a few prompts that students could use with the chatbot. And as I mentioned, if anyone's interested, there'll be the QR code again at the end if you're interested in using or adapting some of these. Students can use it as a conversation partner. So pretend you are a college student from such and such country. I'll ask you a series of questions in Italian, let's say, and I'd like you to respond as if you were a human. It can also be used for grammar, explaining the differences between preterito and imperfecto, for example, two past tenses or moods. You have a writing aid also. So I am a college student taking a composition course in such and such language. Here are some ideas I have for writing a paragraph. Write an outline to help me organize my thoughts. So it's not having the chatbot write the composition for the student, but it's helping with organizing ideas and structuring them. It can also be used in terms of cultural exploration, but it's important to keep in mind and to point out to students that there are hallucinations, cases where chatbots will make up information that is not factual. So especially with more commonly taught languages, it's less likely that it's going to make up a cultural fact out of thin air. But it is good to, I tell my students, for example, if it's anything cultural, make sure you're double checking it with another resource before you use it. Some ideas for what instructors can use for activity creation. Can you provide me some examples of project-based learning activities for a specific level and language that align with the ACTFL proficiency standards? For lesson planning, as I mentioned before, it can help with creating questions for tests, true, false, fill in the blank, multiple choice. It can provide an answer key for the instructor as well. So that's something, it's a starting point for creating a test. It can be used for creating rubrics. And that, like I mentioned before, those can be tweaked afterwards. And an important thing to mention is that you can upload text into, you can either copy and paste or upload a document into the chatbot, and it will analyze it and then give you suggestions based on that document. So if you put in there the assignment, then it will tailor it specifically to that assignment as opposed to just a general rubric. Some other aspects to consider is, as I was talking about with online translators, in the past at least, there was a tendency to try to prohibit them. Even with prohibitions, many students, a large majority of students, were still using online translators. Similarly with AI chatbots, it's likely unenforceable to have a total ban on chatbot usage. And the MLA came out with a statement saying, focus on approaches to academic integrity that support students rather than punish them, and that promote a collaborative rather than adversarial relationship between teachers and students. So instead of starting out as sort of like a cat and mouse game between the students, trying to work with them and explain why a chatbot should or shouldn't be used in a specific circumstance. And providing guidance on responsible usage also can be useful. And here's an example of syllabus statements. So one good thing to do would be having on your syllabus what students are and aren't allowed to do with the chatbot. At the U of M in the World Languages and Literatures Department, we've come up with 3 different tiers that instructors can choose from. So the instructor decides at the beginning of the semester, for my students, I'm going to use tier 1, for example. So that would be for instructors who are comfortable with having students use AI in a large variety of cases to support their language learning. We do have some faculty members who are in tier 3, that they don't want their students using AI at all. So it's a more restrictive approach that allows very little to none in terms of in-class usage. And so that way students have an idea from the beginning of the semester, well, what is my instructor expecting of me? And so I gave here some examples of tier 2, just to give an example as the in-between policy. So listing what are some allowed uses for the chatbot, what are some disallowed uses in terms of graded assignments, making sure that things are cited. So, and it will depend on each individual instructor and each institution, what they would like the specific requirements to be. And we also broke it down in terms of levels. So what you would like a first semester student doing with an AI might be very different from what you want a 4th year student who's taking conversation and composition courses, for example. So giving examples so students have an idea of what is or isn't expected, examples of allowed use versus plagiarized use, and also telling students if they do use the chatbot, how should they cite it? So for brainstorming, assistance provided by ChatGPT and then so on. And then you can tell students what format they should cite the usage in. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is a tool from Stanford where it's basically interactive and it helps you with creating a tool that's tailored for your course or for your department. So for example, with questions on what is the policy, what tools does it apply to, when does it apply, what are the consequences, and so on. So there are a number of examples out there of policies, but then you can also use a tool to help with creating your own policy. And that's the link underneath it. That will be in the PowerPoint as well. Another approach is having student training. So if you do want students, at least to some extent, to use either an online translator or AI chatbot, or if you recognize that even if they're not using it in class, it's not possible to completely stop them from using it on their own time. These are some ideas in terms of training students and using these tools. And so one study here found that 20-minute trainings at the Université de Neuchâtel on machine translation literacy had 4 components. The difference between online dictionaries and online translators, about pre-editing, for example, avoiding idioms and other structures that are a problem for an online translator. What are some risks of using online translations in terms of ethics, in terms of quality, and what are some of the strengths or weaknesses of online translator systems? So those were the 4 primary components, and their survey showed that it improved online translator literacy among students, so that they were not using online translators just to search for isolated words, for example. And that's a common fallacy, is to assume, well, if I just put one word into the translator, it's probably not going to be a problem. It's actually more likely that the translator will get something wrong if it's an isolated word than having the context of what in what situation the word is being used. So it did help improve students' literacy in online translation use. Another example is increasing student linguistic awareness through a group activity. And with this study, students ran sentences through a translator. They were asked to identify tense use or other errors. They chose between the output of either one of the online translators, or they created their own answers. So that way they were thinking critically about what came out of the online translators instead of just assuming that it must be correct because the computer said it. And there were 27 second semester Spanish students, and over 75% of students picked their own translation. So they had the option of using the translation from online translators, but they chose to do their own instead. And before the study, 100% of students reported using online translators during class sometimes or often. Then after the study, that dropped down to 50%. So even if your goal is not to encourage students to use online translators or AI chatbots, doing some training with them can help them see some of the strengths or weaknesses, and maybe they will decide, well, maybe I can do this on my own. Maybe I don't need to use an outside tool. Another study, which was one that I ran, was among third and fourth semester second language Spanish and French students. One group was trained to use Google Translate. One was not trained to use Google Translate, but used it to write compositions. And then there was another group that did not use the translator and didn't receive training. The training for Group A was a 20-minute self-guided online training that I'll show examples of in a minute, about how to use Google Translate, what the interface is, and some hands-on translation examples so they could start using it. And my results were that those who used the Google Translate with training scored higher on the written compositions than those who were not trained and used the translator. And in turn, both of those groups scored higher than the control group that didn't use the translator at all. So the best results were students who were trained in using Google Translate. The second best were those who used Google Translate without training. And then the lowest scores were those who did not have access to the online translator. And it is important to note that just because they got a higher composition score as rated by independent raters, that does not necessarily mean long-term learning. But as I mentioned earlier, some studies have been coming out showing that online translators can help with online learning, although we're still, there are more studies that are investigating it. And so just to show you quickly what I did, there was a 5-step approach that I took for the training. So students were introduced to the tool. They got a demonstration of how it worked. There was some hands-on testing of the tool through examples. There was a review of the strengths and weaknesses of the tool. And then they were given a policy for the study. They were told what they were allowed to do for the study. For the classroom, it can be a policy about how the tool should or should not be used for class and why. So again, I know that the type is pretty small here, but the idea is that at the beginning it's saying, what is Google Translate? What are some advantages? And then throughout the training, there are questions to check whether or not students are engaging in the activity and understanding what's being asked. So which of these advantages are important to you? Which of these disadvantages are important? Based on the information, which do you think is true? Translators are always perfect, they're always wrong. They're exactly the same as dictionaries, or they're sometimes right, sometimes wrong, and so on. So having students think about online translators. Then they were asked to put in specific words and phrases into the translator, and then say what the results were and whether they thought it was correct or incorrect. And then the study had a summary of, based on what you just did, these are some things the translator did well, that it didn't do well, and then at the end of the policy, whether or not the translator can be used in this circumstances. So that's one example. In terms of AI chatbots, I did a very similar training with my students. So this wasn't part of the study yet, but it will be for my upcoming study. But it's the same sort of approach, introducing the tool, demonstrating it, giving students hands-on testing, reviewing strengths and weaknesses, and then giving them the policy. So they were asked, after it introduced what AI chatbots are, what are some positive aspects you think are important? What are some disadvantages? So again, asking them, do you think they're always perfect? Does it depend? Then it gave them a number of different chatbots. In our case, because our institution uses Microsoft products, I asked them for the training to use Copilot, which is by Microsoft, but I told them that during the semester, they're welcome to use other tools as well. And giving them some ideas of what some of the features are in terms of conversation memory, the fact that it will remember conversations you've had previously with it. And that, especially if you're in a paid version, it depends on the individual chatbot, but these are some features that are available in many chatbots. How to edit prompts, how to copy and export, and so on. So talking about some of the features, then giving it specific prompts. So as I mentioned, you will not generally get the same response to a prompt from person to person. If you ask the chatbot a number of times, you'll get a number of different answers. But this way, they get a chance to see what are some possible outputs and then to think about it. Did they think it was very helpful? It was pretty helpful, not very helpful, not helpful at all. And it mentions, is it good to check another tool or not? So they're reflecting on what came out of the chatbot in terms of output. And then once again, talking about strengths and weaknesses. So just summarizing what things AI chatbots generally can do well, what things that would not necessarily do quite as well at, and then reminding them of what the policy is for class. So that's another example of training that could be given to students to help guide them in AI use. So that's essentially it for the talk. So just briefly, I wanted to mention that it's important for instructors to become familiar with online translators and AI chatbots as well, to promote language proficiency and ethical use of technology, to focus on meaningful communication, instead of achieving native-like accuracy, pointing out to them that the meaning is just as important, if not more important, than the accuracy is. Critical AI literacy is now a part of digital literacy. So that's one way of looking at the situation. And I like this quote from Paulette and Myers, that there's no denying that the increased student-computer interface will remain as a byproduct of the pandemic. The addition of the computer and the internet into the mix results in a form of triangle relationship, instructor, student, and computer, which cannot be undone, nor should it be. So we're not going to get rid of computers or chatbots anytime soon. So my approach to it is that it's good to try to use it as in a positive and responsible way with our students as we can. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Nina?
Sorry, I'm on my phone today, so I needed a second. Errol, thank you so much for speaking to us and for that very informative presentation. I always learn so much from you.
Oh, thank you.
I did want to ask you because, you know, I'm doing the same approach where, you know, I'm speaking to students about how AI can help them, and a lot of them are already using the, particularly ChatGPT for practice tests, and they're saying it's getting better and better. But I did want to ask you, in your research, when you come across students who do not use AI for environmental concerns and ecological concerns, how do you approach that? And if they're not using AI, how do you address that, you know, they are at a disadvantage from the other students, so that are using it. So I just wanted to see what you've kind of seen in your research and maybe address that.
That's an excellent question, and it's something that I grapple with as well, since that's also a concern that I have. I haven't had any of my own students specifically tell me that they would not like to use the translator because of the environmental impact. I do have a colleague that has mentioned that before. But what I've done in that training, which I just did a few weeks ago with my students, It says in there, and I don't think it was in one of the screenshots that I did, but it tells students that they're not required to use AI, that they can use other tools if they prefer an online dictionary, they can use their textbook, they can ask me a question. So as you said, that does to some extent put them at a disadvantage compared to students who are using the AI chatbot. But I think that at least I have not seen a study where it's looking at that yet, comparing students who are using the chatbot versus not using them for, they're choosing not to use it, and how that's affecting their learning. That is definitely something that needs to be addressed. So I know that that's an issue in Memphis, this where XAI has its one of its data centers, and so that's been very much in the news. So I know there are concerns with people here. It's just a matter of, I guess, right now what I do is I give students the option to not use it, and so far I have not heard any complaints from that approach. But there are certainly other solutions out there also.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I have another question, if I may.
Great.
Errol, we're having discussions about composition and composition writing, and we've actually, because AI is so prevalent, and I did a survey in my class where I asked students how they use it and why they use it, and a lot of students respond, to save time. I'm too busy, so I know it'll do the work for me. And that was more of an anonymous survey, so I told them I want to really know how they're using it.
Right.
So this kind of fed into our discussions around compositions, and it's difficult to detect if AI has been used. So I'm just curious, in your work with the compositions, are you having them write it in class with those tools, or are you having them do that at home?
I'm having them do it in class. So I know that I have colleagues that have students do preparation steps at home, and they're told that they can use the AI if they'd like to organize their ideas, but then they have to actually write the composition in class on paper so that they're hopefully processing the language, and it's at least to some extent their actual language instead of just blindly putting what the chatbot put out. But what I've been doing with my students is having them do it in class. And so on the most recent one, my students just did today, actually, they had preparation steps where they had, and I'm teaching first semester this semester. And so they came up with what are some words that you already know related to greetings, classroom objects, a few other things, descriptions. And so they first did it without consulting the computer or the chatbot. What do they already know? The second step was now using a chatbot or a dictionary or asking your instructor, look up 2 words related to descriptions that you don't know and 2 classroom objects you don't know, and then cite your source. And then after that, again, for the 5 to 6 sentences they wrote, then not using AI, so putting the AI away, and then using the information they got from the AI or from the planning steps. So that seems to be working right now. I did something a little bit similar earlier, but we'll see with this one, once I grade them this weekend, how they did. But that seems to me like hopefully that's a good approach.
Yeah, and it sounds like there are just kind of added steps then to writing the composition, and instead of kind of just leaving them alone, but prompting, or I shouldn't use, but guiding them through the composition. Thank you.
Right. Oh, you're welcome. And that's something that some people do anyway. That's actually before incorporating AI. I used to,
Yeah.
with my first and second semester students, take them through step by step to help them as they're learning the process. Great.
Okay, I have a question about the conversation partner, the sample you showed us. Apparently, the student was very novice, like clear, it's like beginner student in English. And when he was communicating with the ChatGPT, apparently the language of ChatGPT was advanced. And you know, for beginners, we scaffold students learning. We know what are the words they understand, so we communicate using them so they can understand us. But with the ChatGPT talking kind of at advanced level for the student, I wonder how students, like beginner students, will learn from it, or they will be kind of disappointed or frustrated.
That's an excellent question. And I know that there have been some studies done by chatbots that were specifically designed with certain vocabulary lists and grammatical structures. And that is possible to do also with GPT. There are ways of doing it either using a wraparound from another company or just yourself if you're able to do so that it is tailored to specific students, to specific situations. But it is true that with the general purpose chatbots, that sometimes it will aim way too high in terms of the language use. Some cases, when you explicitly tell it that, okay, well, I'm just a first semester student, if you're doing a written chat with them, then it will in the follow-up be a lot more level appropriate. In my experience, it hasn't done as well with that in speaking. I was surprised one time with which one was it? I believe it was with Gemini, that I told it that it was speaking too fast, and then it actually did slow down. So it must be something that these companies are aware of, but you're very correct that for someone who is, for example, a first or second semester student, if they had that sort of conversation, even something simple about toppings on pizza, that would be more difficult for them. So I guess for now, if doing it as a written chat, it's more likely that the chatbot is going to adapt to the level better. But that may be a case where they'll just need to practice with the tutor or with the instructor, and then there'd be more advanced students that could benefit from them more.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Atiya?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Errol. This was very, very interesting. I was especially interested in all the studies you've done and everything that's come out of it. And I was curious about the one with the compositions that you had, the three groups and their
Yes.
performance on the composition being obviously stronger when they had the policy, they'd have the training, and then when they were using the tool, and that was higher than the ones who were not using it all the tool. But I'm wondering
Right.
if you've done further studies afterwards of getting students who've used the tools, now whether it's ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, or translations, and then compared their performance without the tool with students who never used the tool, to see if it's something that they retain and really their language skills do improve with the use of the tool, or is it only improved while using the tool?
That's an excellent question. In terms of my research, I have not, I'm working on a study that I'm going to be doing with AI chatbots, but in terms of online translators, I did a post-test to that study where it was checking to see whether or not students did better or the same or less well, the ones who had used the translator versus ones that hadn't. And there was no statistical difference. So on the one hand, that could be seen as good. That meant that students didn't become so dependent on the AI on the online translator that they did worse, that they learned less. Then the other side of the coin is, though, that means it didn't necessarily help them long term either. But I know that there are other studies that are out there that have found a minor positive effect for using online translators in terms of vocabulary, for example. that they were able to retain some of the vocabulary that they learned while using the online translator, as compared to someone who had not been using a translator. So I don't think that there's a lot out there about that, but so in terms of my own research, I haven't found a difference. And I know there is some research out there that found maybe a slight advantage to people using a translator in some cases, but definitely nothing detailed enough to be definitive.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Great question.
Any other questions? We have like 2 minutes. Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you so much. This was really great presentation. We learned a lot from it, and hopefully now we will think more about how we can use AI in improving language courses. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I really enjoyed being able to talk with people and for the great questions as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yeah.